Hello. Good evening and welcome to the Institute for Ideas and Imagination. My name is Meredith Hunter Mason and I'm pleased to introduce this evening's event where I'm calling from a conversation on short stories which was organized by Institute Fellow Guadalupe Nettel. I'm joined on stage by three extraordinary writers, Guadalupe herself, Maylis de Kerangal, and Ayşegül Savaş. Guadalupe Nettel is a Mexican writer and author of several award-winning novels and collections of short stories, including Stillborn, which was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize. And just a couple of weeks ago, she published The Accidentals, a book of 8 short stories that she will talk more about this evening. Maylis de Kerangal is a French author whose novels include Birth of a Bridge, which won the Prix Medici and was nominated for the Prix Goncourt, and Men the Living, which was adapted for the stage and screen, among other recognitions. Her book of short stories, Canoes, was published in 2021. Ayşegül Savaş is a Turkish writer who is the author of novels Walking on the Ceiling, White on White, and most recently The Anthropologists, which was longlisted for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Her book of short stories, Long Distance, will be published in July. Many of these titles will be on sale by the Red Wheelbarrow following the event. And now I'll hand it over to Guadalupe to get started. Thank you.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here. And thank you to Ayşegül Savaş and Maylis de Kerangal for accepting this invitation. I'm very, very excited. I love short stories. Those authors are amazing short story writers, not only, also novelists, but I'm very happy to be here with them to discuss about this beautiful genre that many people have doubts on, and we're going to talk about that too. So, I think the first way to introduce you to the different collections that we're going to talk about here is to ask the authors about how they decided to name the collection, because you know a collection, it's obviously different an amount of, you know, a lot of different stories, settings, characters. How do you pick a title to just gather all these ideas? And both of them are very good titling, I can tell. Something that I really admire. And maybe we can start from that. So, who wants to start? Maybe Maylis?
Good evening, and thank you for being here. And thank you, Guadalupe, for this invitation. My collection of short stories entitled Canoes. In fact, I conceived the collection as canoes. I saw each story has a canoe, because for me, canoes, it's a word which means grace, speed, fluidity, some as links with circulation, and I wanted to start from that meaning, that vibration. It's a short story about voices, and I wanted to probe the nature of human voices. I wrote this all this book just during we were in 2020. It was during the pandemic. So for me, I tried to build. I wanted an architecture for my book. I did not want and I think Ayşegül and Guadalupe are like me, very interested by building the book, not putting a story after another, but conceiving a collection. And for me, it was there is one novella, and around it 7 other stories like Satellite. I mean, it's like a constellation, and all the novels are talking to each other. They are all in connection, and they have also a common point of contact, which is this canoe that circulates between them. And as in, also I was thinking about the canoes as basket, as container, as mouth. I mean, full of voices, full of vibration, full of breath. And for me, it was the good title.
Yes, definitely. And also, there is, as you were saying, I was thinking, why didn't she pick a title, referring to voice, to the mouth? But the cavity of the canoe is a beautiful metaphor for this,
Thank you. Yes, it's for me. I saw them as mouth and full of story, because also some of two stories are taking place in Canada and United States, and especially in Canada, the canoes are were the way that the Indian used to circulate and go across their territory. I mean, using the flows of the rivers, and using a very complex network, hydrographic network. And I saw they are always convey message, and so for me there were voices.
And Ayşegül, what about you?
So this short story collection coming out is called Long Distance, and unlike Maylis, actually, these stories I wrote over probably a span of, let's see, 2017 to 2025. No, even longer. Someone do the math. 8 years. And then, of course, when it came, and then at some point I said, I have enough stories for a collection. But of course, you don't just put one after the other. You say which one of them fits. The stuff I had written before that time, I thought were too different in their voice. I was a different person. They didn't fit. I thought, okay, so there is some idea that keeps repeating here, so it might make a collection. Some of them don't belong. And Long Distance seemed to be the title that was both most compelling but most appropriate to what I kept discussing again and again, which was some idea of displacement. You have characters arriving, you have a study abroad student in Russia, you have lovers uniting in Rome, you have 3 women going on holiday to Marseille. So this idea of displacement I saw was a recurring theme, and also relationships, not just romantic but friendships. But the interesting thing is, if you had said, okay, Ayşegül, so clearly you're interested in themes of displacement, and take the next year to write a story collection, which is what you did, right? Yes. I don't think I would have been able to do it, because of how capricious I find short stories, and how, unlike a novel, I think you can sort of premeditate a novel and you can sit down to say, okay, this is what I want to write about. With a short story, and I want to hear how, short stories come to you, they're like crimes of passion, they just like sort of appear at you and like, oh, and they have to sort of be done on the spot. That's why I think it's over such a long period.
So I think it's Chekhov who used to say that novels are like marriage and short stories are like love affairs. And so it's like on the spot. And if it's going to happen, it happens. And if not, it's not like 2 years later.
Yeah, and you can't take a short story to therapy. Like if it's not working, it's not working. Whereas you can fix a novel.
Yes, you can. Or at least you tried with all your heart, because after writing 100 pages, you don't want to take it to the garbage. So, okay, in my case, I think I relate to both of you, because, at the beginning, I just write the short story that comes. It's an image, it's something that I've heard, and I said, this is a short story, and I have to write it right now. And then when I have 3, let's say, and at some point there's always another short story that comes and that tells me what is going to be the common thread. And so that's what happened with The Accidentals, that in Spanish is called Los Divagantes, which is a story that speaks about birds who are lost. You know, these albatros who always go to the same, they're born in austral regions like Patagonia or Australia, and then they can fly amounts of distances that no one could imagine, because they don't have to move their wings. They're just flying like this, like a plane, you know, like a paper plane. And so they can go further and further, and they almost, you know, like some people say, but it's not exactly like that they do the whole world traveling. But they fly very long distances. And then they always come back to their land, and they reproduce in the kilometer where they're born. So they find a mate, and they stay with this mate who has also flown very long distances, but was born there. And they reproduce there, and they never leave the land again. So, and all albatros do that, except those who knows why. Maybe because they got lost during a storm, or because something changed in the climate, or because they lost the strain. They never come back. They never settle. They never reproduce, or they are not so well, you know, studied at least. And the image of those albatros was, you know, the image that prevails in all the short story collection, because I told to myself, all the characters are like that, actually. All of them are like that. They're lost. They thought they were going to that direction, and to that career, to that destiny, and suddenly they ended up absolutely somewhere else. And so when I saw that image, I said, that's the title of the short story collection. And the other short story that appeared already from that point of view, you know, it started to be like that.
And, I mean, I would say that I think all 3 collections have in common this idea of people having lost their way, right? And they're a little off track. And I mean, Maylis's book definitely has people geographically displaced. You know, you have a character in Canada, you have a character who moves to like the west of the United States, and I mean, I also do wonder whether that's sort of essential to the short story form, that you're writing about people a little bit on the suburbs, or like on the outskirts of society.
I don't think so. I think when I presented first Canoes, I used to say it's like a novel in separated piece, because there is this novella in the middle, which is a major text of the collection, and the other ones are like extension or echoes, I mean, of this one. So for me, this one is rather autobiographic. The other, not so much. So for me, it was as I was writing each story one after the other during perhaps not 1 year, but in that time of pandemic, where our mouths were parasitized and veiled by the mask, and our voices were troubled, and something happened here in our faces. I thought I had to probe to capture a new way of hearing the voices in that period. So for me, it's all the text is very. It's very tense. I mean, each there is strong connection in my mind, but I hope it appears in the collection, between the text and the question of writing about people that have shifted from their birthplaces. They are enlightened by the Mustang, which is the major text, because it's the story of someone who was completely lost. I mean, in United States, in Colorado, as I was when I lived there. I mean, it was very strange. But for me, it was. I think that novel allowed writing a short story allowed me to write this first autobiographic text. I mean, it was the first time I was writing something so personal, so intimate. I mean, so autobiographic. So it was perhaps the main point for me, rather than exploring the marge, I mean, the borders of our spaces. I mean, but there was a miracle for me in that.
And you also started that something that struck me in that book is that you use the first person, while normally it's not the
My
person
voice.
you would. Yeah, I mean it's your voice because we can recognize your writing, but it's from another point of view. So that's very interesting.
Yes, I wanted to perhaps to train my writing using that first person, trying to go closer and closer to my intimacy, I think. But I was also thinking about the next book, and I wanted to go beyond my fears and writing a novel with the first person, which could to take autobiographic points. So for me, it's always these 8 texts are written at the first person, but also 7 or 8 of them are woman voices. So for me, it was very important. It was like a tribe of women. And one of them is about a woman, but it is the narrative voice is a husband, and it's a story of a telephone message on the recorder.
And you write always at the first person, right? Or am I wrong?
No. I think I'm trying to think. I think all my novels are in the first person, and the stories aren't. They go back and forth. And I was just thinking, what is that difference? I think, honestly, I think it's humor. If I see a character and I want to be a little bit ironic in my approach towards them, or if I sort of find them a little bit foolish at the beginning, when I first encounter them at the beginning of the story, I think it will be third person. And for, I guess, more tender texts, I tend to write in first person, just because that distance doesn't feel useful to me in any way. And you love the first person.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's the first person, the person I prefer. I published a little bit of, like several, because I also like adventure and, going through challenges and imposing them to myself. And I've been trying to use the second person, and the second, it's very difficult for me. And the third person, it's less difficult for me, but I feel it too far away, too, too distant. And sometimes I feel it fake. I don't have this impression of, honesty that I can have at the first person, even though if I'm not speaking about myself, if I'm, talking from the point of view of a Cuban misogynistic guy who is, totally bitter, but I like to inhabitate my characters. I like to take those voices. I always use this image from the Caribbeans, you know, in Santeria they say, le baja el santo, which means the spirit inhabits you. And I always feel that when I'm writing, and that's something that I really enjoy. So, but I want to try and write something at the third person as well.
And when you say, you know, that you want to sort of face these challenges, I also wanted to ask both of you whether you see the short story as a place where you can experiment, and then before sort of taking on a bigger experiment in the novel, whether you use it as that sort of like a training arena.
It was your case, no? At least
Yes,
for the
it
first
was.
person.
It was my case. It was not only the reason why I use the first person, but in fact, effectively, I want to see if I was able to write using that voice, because my previous novel were more collective, building groups, building communities, and with no major character. I mean, I was no personnage principal, does not exist in my previous book. So it was, for me, it was a big step, and and I was, it was a way for me, a real path. I wanted to see if I was able to be more closer, and also because I have still, I think, a problem with my own presence in my book. I mean, you know, it's not so clear for me to be désigné, to be in my book as Maylis de Kerangal, you know, and I'm not completely cool with that, and so for me, I thought it was impossible, and Mustang was for me, I love this text because I tried, but I wrote it thinking it was short text, and I was trying something. So and for me, now short stories are very interesting to test, to experience. And also, not only in terms of voices, of narration, but also if you can, how far you can play with language, situation. For example, Guadalupe, when you wrote Playing with Fire, for example, it's not a little scene, a little situation. It's a whole story of a family in a holiday. I mean, a family trip in the forest with many complex relationship between the mother, who is the narrative voice, and the two sons and the husband. And I mean, it's long. It's like it could have been an entire novel, but writing it as a short story, I think you can hold it like we feel all the marks, all the structure very well. I mean, it's very intense. You can get more intensity with working in a format. I mean, small format. It's not small, but your short story are quite long, but it's, for me, you succeed in in catching intensity with that kind of work in small format.
Yes, I think that's the length I prefer, actually. Not very short, not novellas either, but in the middle, you know, yes. like just 20 pages, let's
you
say.
found your natural, I mean, format, because all the stories are have quite the same length in your book, and I think it's your natural length. Yes.
Yes, I also feel that. I think that's the length where I can control things and also produce, like you say, tension. A lot of, yeah, I wanted tension in that story, and I wrote it many times. And I changed the structure. At the beginning, the big event was at the first page. It started like that, and then I realized that if I let it there, everything would be, like on the way down after that, and it was impossible. So it allows you to write and write again and again the story until you got it. Yes. And a novel doesn't allow you so much, at least not in my case, and especially, if it's long, it's even more complicated.
But I think short stories can help you. For example, Ayşegül, for me, her collection, each short story, each text is a piece of. It's about distance, and all are about distance and about subtlety. I mean, subtilité. On dit subtilité. Yeah. Subtlety. It's very. Is very, because it's always person who have deception or the desire, but people are going very close, but not enough to be quite in contact. There is always a distance, and in each text, I think it was a very interesting work about how to be in front of your old friend or your lover or your mother, without being completely with her, and sometimes with great, with gaps, with important gaps and sensible gaps. And I was wondering if you've chosen this format, these short stories to work on, to capture, to probe this subtlety, how we can be together. I mean, the question of distance, especially.
I want to add something about the subtlety in your text. Is also a lot of non-dit, things silence, things that you don't say but you can sense in the plot. It's full of that. Yes. It's like
especially long distance.
Yeah, the narrators, like catch everything in their, partners or friends, and but there's something, like they see terrible things, very sad things, as sometimes, or awful things about them, but they are quite compassionate at some point. That's something that I really like. That you never, stab them. It's like. Yeah, it's very subtle.
I don't even know if that's sort of my shortcoming as a writer, because I can't go all out with the tragedy or the drama, and I just sort of like rein it back and I say, no, this is too much. But I don't know if you've had this feeling of sort of discovering what you do again and again in your writing, and then thinking, oh my God, like it's all about people not being able to communicate their affection to one another. Like there is something almost pathological to discovering that about yourself. Like of course, when you're choosing the collection, you say there is all of these stories go together, but the fact that I've written so many stories over 9 years on the same theme does also say something. I'm remembering this really, really wonderful book about by Frank O'Connor. Has anyone read it? About this lecture he delivered on the short story in the 60s. What's it called? And like the title actually is, basically it's this very, very interesting book where he is asking, why is it that Russia and Ireland and the United States have produced such great short story writers, and they have such a rich tradition of the short story, and England, like sort of the birthplace, one can say, of the novel, has none. And it's called The Lonely Voice. And the reason he comes up with, it's so beautiful. He says, because these are stories are about submerged populations, and basically what you get you know, you have, and those submerged populations, those lonely voices are different across cultures and across time frames. But so, you know, you have Gogol's like officials, or you have Chekhov's doctors or teachers, or, you know, Turgenev's serfs or something. They're different, but the short story as a form is about loneliness, whereas the novel as a form, although Maylis, I think your novels sort of push on the boundary of this, novels are about sort of finding yourself in the hero and, you know, feeling comfort and feeling recognition with the hero, right? So I think, again, the confines of the short story also make it that they are about, ultimately they're about loneliness, and they're about sort of an inability to connect.
I'm so happy to hear that, you know, because many people ask me,
You thought it was you.
why all your stories are on loneliness? And now I know what to answer. I mean,
Just say, go read Frank O'Hara.
Yeah. But that reminds me something that Ricardo Piglia used to say, you know, this Argentinian writer. He used to say that on short stories, there was always two stories. The one that you were thinking you were reading, and the other one that emerges only on the surface by the end of the short story. So, and that's, you know, like a good short story for him. But I think, yeah, that's exactly what happens. This voice which has never the right to express itself.
Yeah. I do also want to ask both of you about, you know, you said, oh, they're very compact, but they're not small, about the, you know, the perceived smallness of the short story, where it is doing so many things at the same time that a novelist, you know, like novels often can't manage to do because they are big and bulky and they don't have that like fine punch. Why do we look down on them?
I've been thinking about that many years, you know, like I remember the first time I proposed a short story collection to my publisher who had already published my first novel. I said, you know, like I told him, I've heard that short stories are coming back. And he said, yeah, that must be true because I've been hearing that for 20 years. At some point it will happen, I guess. But publishers are normally reluctant, as you were saying the other day, to publish short story collections. And as you were saying the other day, it's like a favor they do to the writer, just like, okay, I like your novel, so please stay at the publisher house. I'm going to publish also your short stories, to show how much appreciation I have for you. And I don't know if they sell less, you know, some short story collections sell quite good. I mean, there is, you know, Samantha Schweblin only writes short stories. Of course, she has now, for many years she did that. Now she has one short story, a novella that became, but it was meant to be a short story, Fever Night, was written as a short story. And then she decided to, you know, to rallonge, to make it longer, to extend it. And then it is a short novel. And the other was meant, the Kentucky was meant to be a novel. But that's the only time she decided, I'm going to write a novel now. And Borges, to continue with that side of the world, you know, Argentinian authors, Borges never wrote a novel, and he was a best-selling writer. There are many other examples like that, but they tend to forget that.
I think when I was saying it's a favor to the author, I was really talking about publishing in North America, which is interesting because it is like a national genre, and there are so many great short story writers, and yet it's like, oh no, you know, your agents will be like, oh, short story collection, oh gosh. So it is puzzling to me. And is it to do with the fact that, you know, you're not getting your money's worth when you buy a short story collection because each one ends quickly? What is it?
I can't understand it also because, especially for United States, I think that this gender, it's an idea. I don't know if it's true, but for me it's also linked to the economic life, and I think, and also this. What I love in short stories is also the time they need to be read. And you can have each day your story. For example, I've just read the Alice Munro short story. Each day, because they are quite long, they are quite, as you, Guadalupe, so 30, 35 pages. Each day, you can read your a story. I mean, it takes place in your busy life, and it's not the same time of reading when you think about a novel. A novel, it's a long distance reading. You have to be. It's not in one day. Some of them are very quick to read, but otherwise it's another kind of adventure. And for me, it's very precious when I read short story I love, because I say, okay. For this week, I can have my story each day, and also it takes place in my mind in this very interesting tradition of telling a story to someone, which is not exactly the same thing in the novel. In short story, you can tell a story to someone. I could read my story to you. I mean. And you could read your story to me. I mean, you read your story to someone. It's perfect because it could find insertion into your life, and I love that because I like to, for example, starting a day with a story in my mind, and also the other thing which is very important, it's what you said, says you have the story you read, and after the memory of this reading that continues in your mind, because it's not some short stories are so intense and so strange, and they moves you a lot, and you keep it long. As when I was a child, and I was my father, he used to tell us a story quite each evening. So for me, it's like a breath, and it's why I was so happy to write short story. And I cannot understand why it's not a gender that publishers love, because it's also very simple. If we link economy, I mean capitalism, the rhythm, the way of life, our rhythm of life, our movement, the speediness of our daily life, and have a short story in your pocket. It's great.
I think also it has to do with, that there are short stories and short stories in terms of plot as well. So many short stories are built around an image, around the metaphor, around, like something like that. And it's not, I wouldn't say their lack of plot because they never wanted to have a plot. But people like plot. Readers like plot. It doesn't apply to your stories, because in your stories there is always a plot, not like the plot. But there is, there's always something that happens, something that the characters realize, something that transforms their relationship, their dynamics. Something happens in your stories, but not in every short story. And that's what I think could deceive some readers.
And I mean, I think it also does have to do with this comfort of, a novel, that you settle down with a novel, you love its characters, you feel understood, whereas a short story leaves you with like, wait, what? And I've never gotten questions about, what happened in your novel after the novel ended. I get questions all the time. what happened to them after the story ending? Like, did they break up? Did the friend write back? All the time. And I think maybe it has to do with this unappealing nature of mystery, that we don't, mystery maybe isn't very sellable because it's too abstract. Whereas you can sell a book that says, look, it's going to be your companion and you're going to find an answer to something, or you're going to find some companionship. So I think that's maybe the capitalist angle that the publishers are looking at.
And also, I was thinking, I wanted to add something. It was, at first, they were published in newspaper. I mean, there were not even books. So it's, you're going to work and you have your so it's the magical nature of that kind of
I do want to ask you about whether your short stories escape to your novels, and how, and then whether once they do escape, whether you have to take them out because then you find out, oh, it's a bit too flat when I put it in the novel, or it feels too much, it's too blaring in the novel.
No, I didn't have that experience. Have you?
Sometimes I think you're right. I think some situations or some digressions cannot take place in a novel, so perhaps they shift on the side and they can try to, you start to think they could become a short story, and I like this kind of with les vases communicants, communicating vase. I mean, it's always about writing. But and I think also that the form of the novel is much more flexible. It's and free. But the short story less. You have to find the question of the form is in front of you always.
Regarding with what you were saying, I think, short stories are not for lazy readers, because they have to complete, they have to imagine, they have to complete the thing. Also, Julio Cortázar used to say that the novel was like a film, and a short story was not like a short film, but as a photography. You see the photography, you see movement, you see characters, and they're doing something, but you have to guess what was happening just before and what is coming next. And the short stories can be like that. Many times they are like that. They leave a lot to the imagination of the readers. That's something that I enjoy a lot, but maybe not many people do. So maybe, we can open the conversation now to the public. I'm sure many of you have questions and you would like to.
Thank you. I just had a question. I think you mentioned how you get inspiration before, and I was wondering if you have a different sense of, how do you get an inspiration for a novel versus for a short story? I think you mentioned how it's kind of punchy, but is there a big difference? Yeah, thank you.
A short story, I've also learned this. It didn't used to be the case for me. I used to try to write short stories when I first tried writing, and they didn't go anywhere. I have now learned that a short story comes to you whole from beginning to end, and if you know the ending, then you can write the short story. This has been my experience, and in fact, the punch is that you know the end, and then you can sort of sit down and tell the whole thing. Whereas the inspiration for a novel, I think, it has to be some sort of image or a landscape. It has to be vast enough that you say, oh, let me enter, and it'll be so fun to explore it for several years. Let me walk through this landscape. So that sort of openness, to me, signals that it's a story. If I know the ending, it's a short. To me, signals that it's a novel. Otherwise, I think it's a short story if I know the ending.
It comes always like a revelation, like you see something, someone doing something, or you hear a story, and you say, this is a short story. You can't develop it, for pages and pages, and you wouldn't like it to be like that. You wouldn't like to stay with that story for 3 years or even 1 year. You just want to write it down as soon as you can and stay there until you have told it in a proper way. But it's more like an image that strikes you, or a story that you hear, and it's more based in one scene or one act or one idea, while a novel is like it's a whole mystery, it's a whole constellation of people and dynamics and people evolving, and it's a life story. Novels are, even if they don't, cover the whole life of a person, there are many events, and of course, you don't know the ending. But I don't feel like Ayşegül that I know the end of every short story. I think I know the end, but many times I write it down and I realize that the end was not the one I was thinking.
But another. I played this, a few of my students are in the room, and sometimes I play this game with my students that's totally wild, where I say, guess the inspiration. Like, what do you think the author's deepest desire was to write this story? And when I was reading The Accidentals, I was guessing Guadalupe's inspirations, and I was I wrote to her and I said, you're so wicked. And I think the inspiration is these crazy setups. What is at the core is, wouldn't it be so strange if the pandemic lasted 15 years and this family who loved one another really decided that they couldn't stand one another? And then it sort of takes off from there.
In terms of inspiration, I could say that what interests me and what moves me also is to find correspondences and link and connection between stories that comes in life. When in your daily life you can hear, you can meet. You can encounter many stories. Just you have to be cautious, and they are here. They are here. It's fascinating. But what I like is to link them as a collection. In terms of poems, to find a word which could be able to connect them together, to link them together, to sew them together, and I would be very not happy, but I would be satisfied if I could have a book which finds points of contact between all the stories that are flowing in our lives. All the story, each day, all the stories. It begins from the morning to the evening, and you hear they are here. They come all day long. But I like to build, little places. Build spaces to collect them together, and it's perhaps poems. You need to find a word when you are a poet to present your poems under one word, and for this it was canoes, and I have other ideas now, but I like to it's incredible to see how everything are and how we are and our lives, and even in terms of politics that seems so far from us. Powers that seem so far, how much we are always tied with that. It's so connected, and as all the poor writers, I have a notebook, and it seems to be ridiculous, because all the writers have their note. But sometimes at the end of the week, it has been so rich that I think perhaps each of them could grow grow as a flower. I mean, as our seeds, you know, our seeds for stories. And the problem is the problem is to find a space, an order. I mean, to find for them an architect or build something for them to give them hospitality into your writing.
Be the best.
Can you hear me? Thank you so much for everything that you said. When you mentioned that if a novel is like a movie, then a short story is like a photograph, I really like that sentiment a lot. Whenever I write a short story, it always starts with an image of something strange. And as a photographer as well, I feel like they're kind of the same sentiment. But I wanted to know, kind of with respect to that, how short can a short story be and still be a short story? So many times I write, I don't know, is it a vignette? Is it a sentence? Is it, I mean, how other, forms of like a very long sentence, is it a short story? Could I someday dream of publishing a collection of, 800 one-page, half a page stories?
In Spanish, I can't but not tell it. All the Spanish-speaking person are thinking about the same short story right now. It's from Augusto Monterroso. The shortest story we have is when he woke up, the dinosaur was still there. That's it.
Me encanta.
And sometimes there was Monterroso was invited. He was from Guatemala, and he was invited to a congress in Mexico, and the president was going to give him a medal or something. And they asked the wife of this president, who was, she was very pretentious, and they asked her, "Have you read The Dinosaur by Monterroso?" And you're already imagining the answer. And she said, "I'm reading it."
So this is kind of like a question that goes against itself, but so you mentioned like that the short story kind of doesn't need to do as much of like the hand-holding and the world building that the novel does, thereby giving the reader this kind of like space of omission to kind of feel themselves into the story through the form, which is something that like I really agree with, both like reading it and when I write it. But I also have the question of, do you also feel that by writing the short story you have more freedom to write kind of like unsavory potentially or antisocial, anti-heroine type characters? And if so, like how do you kind of find a balance in terms of like being able to flesh out these characters that you couldn't potentially sit with for a 300-page novel, but still giving the space of the reader to sit with it for that time without feeling like you're alienating the reader or, not giving justice to the characters by not fleshing out the rest of it?
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's a very interesting question. Actually, I think that you really have to choose the features of your character in a novel, in a short story, very carefully, because you don't have so much space to develop them. So you really have to give to the reader like the thing that would, like describe them the better. And of course, you will never stick to them as you stick with characters in a novel, but you have them in your mind. You know exactly how they are, how they speak, how they move, what happened to them, etc. You have the characters as if they were characters of a novel, but then you just have to tell the reader 3 things about them, and so the reader can know what kind of person is that. That's how I feel it. What do you think about?
I agree. I agree with you. But I think also that, in a novel, the characters are defined, along the book. So they change. It's hard to make a character change in a short story. Alice Munro can, but not everyone. Yes, I think you have to be precise. It's the gender of precision also. So.
But and regarding your question about the sort of less likable characters of short fiction, I feel like in a novel you would have to like them, right? You would have to find a point of compassion for them not to be flat. Whereas a short story does have some room, but for the short story to also sort of like take flight, I think ultimately you have to stop seeing them. I think I mentioned that sometimes I write in the third person if I think a character is foolish, but I think towards the end of the story that has to switch in some way, and I have to try to figure out like where is their humanity, or what is it about them that made them seem foolish to me at the beginning.
I have a question, if I may. It's Meredith. So I was reading The Accidentals last week, and after each story, like Ayşegül said, it's like a punch, and I felt like I need to sit with this and think about and reflect on it. But then I was reading it on the metro, and I would only make it one stop before I was like, no, I really want to read the next one right now. And so I wanted to ask your experiences reading each other's short stories, or short stories in general. Do you read it in one go, or do you take breaks between each one? And how do you imagine your readers reading your books?
I think that is exactly what I would like. That they read just in a session the whole short story. Let's say in a trip, like a train. Trains are perfect for short stories. You take a train and you can read 2 or maybe 3. It depends on the short stories, and then you reflect on that. You stop and then you reflect on the short story that you just read for maybe one day, as Maylis was saying, like one day. But also, I understand that you want to read the other, because normally in a collection, at least the collections that I would like to, that I imagine, that I try to write, all the stories communicate between them, so there's a dialogue. It's not that they are telling the same story or anything like that, but they say something about the previous one and about the other one as well. So there is a dialogue between the stories, and it's another point of view that you add to another, family dynamics, for instance, or friendship, or the impossibility to speak, or that. So yeah, I think I understand why you want to read the next.
This is a question more specifically for Ayşegül, but thank you all so much for being here. My question is, with what tone do you approach writing about displacement in this collection? Because I heard you say about the anthropologist that you didn't want to approach it with a tone of sadness in terms of the immigration. You didn't want it to be a typical narrative that emphasized sadness. You wanted to talk about the act of building something and of joy. So I'm curious that you mentioned that displacement's a theme in the next collection, and I obviously haven't been able to read it yet. So yeah, can you talk about your attitude in that respect?
So now this is sort of where I contradict myself. So the anthropologist is saying, short stories are completely different, and they can't make it their way into a novel because they'll stand out. The anthropologist was actually inspired by a short story. But and you're very right. I don't know why I said that, but I still stand by it, that I didn't want to have sort of a sad tone writing about immigrants, but sort of almost a quirky one. But the story, it was called Future Selves, had a very, very somber tone. The reason it had a somber tone was that I knew the ending when I was writing it. I knew where the story was headed, and it was quite tragic. So when I finished, and when I was done with the story, I thought there is something more there, and I want to turn it into a novel. But what was there was actually not the story itself. What was there was the structure. I thought the structure is so open-ended. It's about a couple looking for an apartment to buy. And I thought I can take this structure and write an entire novel, but I need to get rid of the content so that I forget the tone, so that the tone becomes lighter. And so, you know, I sort of started breaking up the story just to forget that tone. And I think, the tone of a story is, it's very natural, right? It just sort of, once you start writing it, you give yourself the authority to tell that story, and you say, I know how to tell it because I feel it really deeply. The voice emerges. You don't have to invent a voice for the story. You don't have to say, should it be, like quirky? Should I be doing this trick? It comes naturally, and I think you have to go with that.
It comes from a state of mind, from a mood. You can be very sad, and then it comes out, or you can be playful or mean or wicked.
I have a question for Guadalupe. I'm thinking specifically one book, but I don't know the title in English, El matrimonio de los peces rojos. And I was wondering, now I remember that there is always like animals and humans. And I was wondering if, like, before writing this collection of short stories, you already had in mind like that you wanted to work with the animal world and the human, because there are many stories. I was remembering like if I'm not making mistakes, like the professor from the university and the cockroach, and then there's the fishes. There are many stories with animals, and I was wondering if you had this idea in mind before writing, like the collection, of like building this universe of human and animal.
I always liked animals. They always amazed me. I observe them, and so I have already 3 stories on animals, and I knew that I could write more. And at some point there was this, application for this prize, Ribera del Duero, and I was telling to myself, I could write a collection on animals. I already have 3 of them. So why not, just be open to what comes? And so that's also, like you start a sort of radar and it starts searching for things, and they just appear. And so I ended up writing several stories on animals, but I didn't like all of them, so I took 3 out, and I stayed with the 5 that I liked the most. And that's also something strange that happened with collections, Sometimes you have a story that you really like, but it doesn't communicate well with the others. So even if you like it, and even if you would like to publish it, you just can't have it on that collection. And so that's how it happened, It's like, The last one that I wrote is The Marriage of the Red Fish, and it's the one who opens the book. And after that, I sent that to the prize, to the contest, and then my mind went on looking for stories with animals. And that's how I guess they appear everywhere all the time now, in every, So maybe we can stop here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ayşegül Savaş. Thank you, Maylis de Kerangal. And thank you for coming.